Let's go next to the paragraph rules layout. And as I select this, it gives me options to set rules above and rules below my individual paragraph. To show you what these options are, I'll just check the Rule On box for just a moment. And as I do that, I'll see by default it would set a weight of 1 point. I could make that as small as a 1/4 point if I wanted to, or as large as 100 points, approximately 1.5 inches deep. Or I could set any figure in between here as I'm working with that. The type of lines are the same as they'd be available working in my control panel. So if I chose, I could set dashed lines or dotted lines or wavy lines. We're not going to do anything from the default. For the color, it's set by the text color by default, but if I click on these option box arrows right here, I'll see that it shows all of the swatches that I have loaded inside of the document. So if I chose, I could make it black, I could make it paper colored, or I could use any of the process color swatches that are loaded in InDesign by default right now. Cyan, magenta, or yellow, or if I'm working in RGB terms, red, green, or blue. We're not going to do anything here, so I'll just leave that text color by default. If I'd chosen a dotted or dashed line, I could set gap colors and tints, just like I could for the stroke itself for a solid one, for text color and tints of whatever swatch I pick. I can make the width of that the same as the column or the text frame, less the margins that I set inside, or I could make it only as wide as the text. And I have options to set indents, so I could move that line in from the left and the right edge of my text frame or column that I set, or I have the option to move it up or down with the offset and setting that above or below where that line would normally be. Let's go next to the Keep Options layout. And what this does is this allows me to set rules for keeping a paragraph of type in relationship to paragraphs before or after. So in this case, for example, if I click on the Keep with Previous box, it would allow me to either have enough room to place a paragraph of body copy and the previous paragraph of it, or what it would do is it would automatically skip that to the next line as a column or page to take that to the next area if there wasn't enough room to set it at the bottom of a column. We also have Keep Lines Together option available. So for example, I can keep all the lines in a paragraph together. So if I have a 3-deck headline, for example, 3 lines, it will either keep all of those on one column or page, or it will automatically move them all to the next, as well as setting rules for how it corresponds to the start or end of another paragraph. I also have the rules that allow me to start a paragraph anywhere, or if I choose in the next column, frame, or on the next page. We'll work with this a little bit later as we're dealing with long documentation in Chapter 7. Let's go next to hyphenation. And in this case, we have the ability to set rules for how InDesign will break up syllables of a word if there's not enough room to put the entire word on a line before it places a soft return. So we could say, for example, rules for how many characters would have to be on the line before that soft return or after that soft return as we're working with it. We can set the hyphenation zone or the range to where that would be defined. By default, this is set up at anywhere within 1/2 inch of the right side margin. InDesign starts looking for a place to either lay down a space and do a soft return to the next line, or if there's not enough room to hold the entire word, it'll start looking for places where it's going to put that hyphen to break that word up to go between one line and the next. Of course, if you want no hyphenation, all you have to do is turn that check mark off, and none of these options are available. Let's go next to justification. And as I select that, what this does is this allows me to set the rules for how spacing between individual words and letters will be affected as it tries to determine where it's going to place that soft return, where text is going to go from one line and be broken into the next line. And we're actually going to tighten this up a little bit with the word spacing. We're going to change that minimum from 80% to 85. And we're going to change that maximum from 133 down to 115%. We'll leave the desired at 100%, or what's known as an M space, or how much room a lowercase m would take up as we're working with spaces in between the words. The tighter we make this, the harder the math is for InDesign, but the more even results we get as we work with the type. We're not going to change any rules for letter spacing or glyph scaling here. These will be sufficient for what we're looking to do. Let's go to auto letting, which, as I said, you don't want to use, but this is where that setting of 120% of whatever my font size comes into play. Remember, as I discussed before, you always want to use an absolute value when you're setting letting for your paragraph styles. It just saves you from rude surprises. And this also gives us rules for how we would deal with a single word that goes across a line, as well as rules for how Adobe InDesign determines where breaks will happen from line to line as we're setting a paragraph of type. And we're not going to change any of those standards from the default. Let's go next to the span columns layout. And if we're working with multi-column text frames, which we'll demonstrate later in this InDesign CS6 course, I've got the ability to set a paragraph style so that it can span columns. So for example, I could take a header and have it span 3 columns, so it would go all the way across whatever text would follow below. Or I could set it to split column. So if I have a list, say, of information that would fit, I could break that down into halves or thirds, so I could set that type a little bit tighter vertically, as it gave me multiple lines horizontally within the text frame. The drop caps and nested styles layout allows me to set large initial caps for a single letter or multiple letters as I'm working with type to apply a stylistic effect, or to set nested styles, which allow me to build multiple character styles within a single paragraph or a single line of type. So I could set different rules, say, for a product description and pricing and shipping for a catalog description, just to give an example. We have the ability to set rules for grep styles, to set bullets and numbering, so we could set numbers for a number style. So for example, I could say whether I wanted those to be Roman numerals or I wanted to set different Arabic number options. I could set character styles and modes as I'm working with this, a number of options that I have available. We're not going to do any of that right here. I can set the character color, just like we talked about previously with the paragraph rules. Anything that's loaded into a swatch in InDesign can be selected to be my character color as I'm working with this layout for my paragraph style options. I can take advantage of unique open type features if the font I choose for my paragraph style is what's known as an open type font. I can set rules for underline options and strike through options if I check those boxes when we were working with our basic character formats. And finally, I have the export tagging layout, which I can use if I'm working with digital or interactive documents in InDesign. It gives me the ability to set rules for HTML styles for setting my type. Or if I'm working with PDF, I can put paragraph tag formats to that. We'll cover this in detail in Total Training's InDesign Interactivity course that will be offered shortly. So let's go to the first layout option, back to General. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a really quick look at what we've set for our style. Before you get done with creating a paragraph style, you want to make a check at these style settings, which in this case means it's got no paragraph style, which means we're creating a brand new style from scratch. It's not related to anything else. The next style is set to the same style. Again, what that means, if I'm typing within InDesign and I hit the return key or the enter key, The next paragraph will be the same style as the previous one. The font is Times, or Times New Roman if you don't have Times. 13 points on 15-point leading. The character width has been compressed just slightly to 95% of its original size, and the word spacing has been narrowed from 133 to 115% maximum, and the minimum has been brought up from 80 to 85%. Now you see here it shows a rule above. Drat, I made a mistake here. If I go back to my paragraph rules, I'll turn that off. That's the reason why we want to check those general styles, because it allows me to see before I create or use that style that it matches up to exactly what I wanted to do. And when I turned off that paragraph rule style, you notice it no longer shows in my style settings. And then finally, we set it to ignore that optical margin, which means it allows that hanging punctuation that allows me to set type more evenly within the text frame. So if your body copy style settings match mine here, click the OK button, and we will have created the first paragraph style for working with our InDesign trifold brochure template.